Hi, this presentation is part of ECE 592 course presentation series. It will cover the basics of brain-machine interface through EEG. So let's consider this. How do we interact with the world? We use five senses, namely sense of sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell to receive information from outside the world. Our brain processes those signals and send outputs to the muscles of the body parts to accomplish the task. What if we lose the output paths to the muscles, or we lose the muscles itself? That is, what if we cannot move or speak? Is there any way to overcome this problem? What if we want robots to accomplish the task instead of body parts? The answer to all these questions is the brain machine interface or brain computer interface. Quickly go through the definition of brain-machine interface. Brain-machine interface or brain-computer interface is a system which takes the brain signals as an input and gives the person's cognitive state. You may call it person's thought process or state of mind as an output. First and foremost part of the BCI is the biosignal, which indicates the brain's activity. There are many methods by which we can obtain these signals, like electroencephalography, magnetoencephalography, functional near-infrared spectroscopy, and many others. Of all these methods, EEG is the most economical and feasible method of the measurement nowadays. As this presentation is mainly focused on BMI using EEG, so we will discuss EEG only. EEG stands for electroencephalography or electroencephalogram. It was first observed by Hans Berger in 1924. EEG is the recording of brain's activity done by measuring electric field of human brain by putting electrodes on the scalp. So from where these electric field arises? The answer is neurons. Our brain consists of billions of nerve cells called neurons. The neurons are the basic building blocks of our nervous system. The neurons transmit their energy or talk to each other across a tiny gap called a synapse. A neuron has many arms called dendrites. Dendrites act like antennae picking up messages from other nerve cells. Whenever a neuron receives a signal, its electric potential changes. The signal is given to the cell body, which then determines if the message should be passed along or not. These messages are passed along by generating action potentials. This electrical activity always happens inside a live brain, that is, whenever there is a sensory, imagery, or motor action happening, or even during the sleep. The electrodes on the scalp basically detect the weighted effect of this electrical activity. The cells which contribute to the EEG are primarily the pyramidal cells, which are the neurons just under the scalp. So basically, EEG is the postsynaptic dendritic currents from cortical pyramidal cells. Information we can get from EEG. In order to fully understand this, we will go through the basic anatomy of brain. Our brain consists of three major parts called cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain and is composed of right and left hemispheres. It performs higher functions like interpreting touch, vision, hearing, learning, and fine control of movement. While the cerebellum is located under the cerebrum, its function is to coordinate muscle movement, maintain posture, and balance. The brain stem acts as a relay center connecting cerebellum and cerebrum to the spinal cord. It performs many automatic functions such as breathing, controlling heart rate, and body temperature. The surface of the cerebrum has the folded appearance called the cortex. The cortex contains about 70% of 100 billion nerve cells. The nerve cell bodies color the cortex gray-brown, giving its name gray matter. Beneath the cortex are the connecting fibers between the neurons called the axons, which make up the white matter. The cerebral hemisphere have distinct fissures, which divide the brain into lobes. Each hemisphere has four lobes called the frontal lobe, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobe. Each lobe performs its own specific tasks. Like frontal lobe is mainly responsible for personality, behavior, emotions, judgment, concentration, intelligence, and similarly, parietal lobe is responsible for interpreting language, words, sensory and memory, actions, touch, pen, temperature, and occipital lobe is responsible for interpreting vision, color, light, movement, and temporal lobe is mainly for memory, hearing, sequencing, and organizing, understanding language. The two main regions of the cerebrum are the sensory strip and motor strip. The sensory strip is the part of brain located in the parietal lobe, near the border of the frontal lobe. The sensory strip is involved in registering sensation that are connected to the specific parts of the body, while the motor strips, which are located in the frontal lobes, this controls the muscle movement and the ones that are necessary for the speech. If you compare the brain with the controller, so these strips, sensory strips, are the input pins of the controller, and motor strips are the output pins of the controller. So how the EEG is measured? There are few methods by which EEG electrodes are placed. We will discuss most widely used international 1020 system. It uses 4 points on the head called Nasion, Inian, and preauricular points. The span from Nasion to Inian is divided into 10 and 20% increments as shown. This is why it is called 1020 system. Using this pattern and preauricular points in other region, we get this layout of electrode placement. In this diagram, the circles containing numbers and letter represent the electrodes. The latter represent the region of the brain, like F for frontal and C for central, and numbers indicate the location. Odd numbers are on the left side of the brain, and even numbers are on the right side. Lower the number means it is closer to the central line. The central line is indicated by the letter Z, which means 0. The signal strength is very small, in the order of microvolts, and we know that there is interference due to noise which is much bigger in amplitude. So in order to remove noise, we take the differential measurement using differential amplifier. This amplifier basically finds the difference between two input signals. In this technique, we also ensure that there is much higher input impedance so that it does not draw much current and distort our measurements. Thus, EEG is a relative measurement. The measurement can be bipolar, in which the potential difference between a pair of electrode is measured, or it can be unipolar, in which the potential of each electrode is compared either to a neutral electrode or to the average of all electrodes. If we look at the frequency spectrum of normal EEG, we will see that the bandwidth of EEG is about 50 Hz. Furthermore, this bandwidth is divided into more commonly observed frequency bands as shown. For example, if we take the EEG measurement of person sleeping, we will see that the most of its frequency content will be less than 4 Hz, which is delta band. Likewise, we have theta, alpha, beta, mu, lambda, and vertex bands. Please note that mu waves diminishes with the movement or the intention of movement. So these can be used for the control application, which we will see later. Let's look at the basic block diagram of BCI or BMI. Like any communication or control system, a BCI has an input, that is electrophysiological activity from the user, output, that are the device commands, and the components that translate the input into the output, and a protocol that determines the onset, offset, and timing of operation. The figure shows these elements and their particular interactions. Signals from the brain are acquired by the electrodes on the scalp and are processed to extract specific signal features like amplitudes of evoked potentials or sensory motor cortex rhythms, firing rates of cortical neurons that reflects the user's intent. These features are translated into the commands that operate a device. For example, a simple word processing program, a wheelchair, or a neuroprocesses. The important point to notice here is that this whole system involves two adaptive controllers, that is, the brain and the BCI. So the success depends on the interaction of the two adaptive controllers. The user must develop and maintain good correlation between his or her intent and the signal features implied by the BCI. And the BCI must select and extract features that the user can control and must translate those features into device commands correctly and efficiently. Signal can be acquired by invasive technique or non-invasive technique. In invasive technique, the electrodes are placed inside the brain, and in non-invasive technique, the electrodes are placed outside the brain. Signal acquisition is done in two steps. One is signal conditioning, which is removal of unwanted noise and artifacts and amplification, and second is the analog to digital conversion. Unwanted noise can be the biological signals like EMG, ECG, and skin effects, and it can be the electromagnetic noise like power line noise, or it can be due to the eye blinks and mm, electrode malfunctioning. Some of these noises can be used by applying the filters, like power line noise can be removed by applying the notch filter at about 50 hertz or 60 hertz, and eye blinks, which appear to be the low frequency signals in EEG, can be removed by applying a high pass filter with a cutoff of 1 Hz. Similarly, a simple low pass filter is applied in order to band limit the signal for analog to digital conversion. Second type of filter that is most widely used is the averaging filter. The averaging filter is efficient in the cases where the noise is continuously distributed along the spectrum, like in the case we have in EEG. So we use the averaging spectrum most of the time in EEG applications. Once we have the digital signal, it could be used for feature extraction and translating the features into output command to drive a device. The digital signals can be gone through a variety of feature extraction procedures like spatial filtering and voltage amplitude measurements and spectral analysis or single neuron separation. This analysis extracts the signal features that encode the user's messages or commands. BCIs can use signal features that are in time domain like evoked potential amplitudes or neuronal firing rates, or in the frequency domain like mu or beta rhythm amplitudes. In general, the signal features used in present-day BCIs reflect the identifiable brain events like the firing of specific cortical neuron or synchronized and rhythmic synaptic activation in sensory-motor cortex that produces a mu rhythm. Knowledge of these events can help guide BCI development. Now let's focus on the algorithms. The algorithms converts the features into the commands. So a efficient algorithm should consider the three levels of adoption. First, when the user first accesses the BCI, the algorithm should take into account the user's EEG characteristics, because each brain has little bit different EEG response to same signals. So that is why so each algorithm should take into account this consideration. Second level of adoption is the adoption to the variations due to the temperature, due to the hormone level, due to the fatigue or illness. And third level of adoption that the controller must adapt is knowing the fact that the BCI system is basically the cooperation between two adaptive controllers. The brain is also an adaptive controller. It little bit changes its response to same stimuli. So that is why the BCI controller should also take into account this adaptivity while implementing the algorithm. Output device can be any controllable machine, and it can be used for any answering yes/no questions, for word processing, and it can be a wheelchair, it can be a prosthetic device, it can be a virtual reality. Usually, a computer screen is placed before the user, and the output is the selection of the targets or the cursor movement of the BCI. Before going into the applications of brain-machine interface or brain-computer interface, I would like to explain few terms. One is the difference between the evoked potential and spontaneous potentials. Evoked potentials are the EEG signals that are generated by sensory stimulation and provided by the BCI. For example, we apply a visual light to generate certain frequency bands in EEG. In spontaneous inputs, the visual sensory stimulation is not needed to generate the EEG signals. Synchronous BCI and asynchronous BCI. Synchronous BCI systems analyze the brain signals during a predefined time windows, while asynchronous BCI continuously analyze the brain signals no matter when the user acts. Now we will discuss the few modern BCI systems. One of the implementation of the BCI system uses the visually evoked potentials. So visually evoked potential is the type of dependent BCI system because it depends upon the eye muscles movement and uses the concept of evoked potentials. The idea is when we stimulate the user with a light having certain frequency, the EEG signals around the visual cortex will have peaks in spectrum at the frequency components and its harmonics. In this method, the user faces the screen displaying several virtual buttons that flash at different rates. Once the user directs his or her gaze at the button, the system determines the frequency of the photic driving response over the user's visual cortex. When the frequency matches that of the display button, the system concludes that the user wishes to select it. This is one of the applications of the modern BCI systems. The other type of BCI systems are based on the concept of P300 evoked potentials, which follows the concept of independent BCI. It is called independent BCI because it does not uses any eye movement or any other muscles or brain output pathways for implementation. First, let's look at what is P300. P300 is the positive deflection in the electroencephalogram time-locked auditory or visual stimuli. It is typically seen when the participants are required to attend to a rare target stimuli presented within a stream of frequent standard stimuli. So it is most that this positive peak is observed after 250 to 500 milliseconds after the stimuli. Roughly, it happens about 300 milliseconds. That is why it is called P300. The example shown here is the speller program, in which the in which the user types the different letters by merely looking at the letters. The idea is each row flashes at a time, one at a time, and the user has to focus on the letter what he want to type. So in this picture, the user wants to type the letter O. In the picture above, as the flash row does not contain the letter O, so it's her EEG does not have any spike, so it's a normal EEG. But when the letter contain row containing the O is flashed, its EEG has a spike at about 300 milliseconds, which is a P300 pulse waveform, which is detected by the BCI system, and the number of rows counted will give the letter that she is trying to type. The other type of the BCI systems uses the concept of mu and beta rhythms. As discussed earlier, mu rhythms have the band of 8 to 12 hertz, and beta rhythms have the band of 13 to 28 hertz. The idea is the movement or preparation of movement is typically accompanied by a decrease in mu and beta rhythms, particularly contralateral to the movement. This decrease have been labeled as event-related desynchronization. So the graph here shows that the dashed graph shows that no activity, normal EEG, and the solid line shows that the user has the intention or is trying to move any part of his body. So, whereby the BCI systems detects this decrease in the EEG signals and gives the outputs accordingly. There are many applications for brain-computer interface or brain-machine interface. Like it can be a communication and control channel for severely disabled people, locked-in syndrome. Like the example shown here, the person uses EEG signals to control his wheelchair, and this is the same speller program that uses B300 evoked potentials. Other example is the EPB brain-machine interface can be an additional channel of the control in the computer games, and it can provide a very different experience of the gaming. It can bring a new edge of the advanced robots. The figure shows the Honda Asimo robot being controlled by a man through brain-machine interface, and it can be used to monitor the fatigue level of the drivers for long drives, so that in order to avoid accidents. It can also bring the science fiction that we are using in we are used to see in movies into the reality. The brain machine interface provides the way for the implementation. And other application of the brain machine interface is that one day we can use the brain as the computer, instead of the CPU. Instead of the CPU. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please send me on my email.